Great. And what has been the most inspiring part of the conference for you?
It was seeing Michelle Obama. I thought it was really just tremendous. I thought, for her to say, particularly those who are, volunteers here, and for those who are volunteer managers here and community organizers, to say what you do matters. And the president and the first lady, we know it matters because we were there. And like you, when I was doing that kind of work, I heard, oh, Michelle, that's really nice, but when are you going to get a real job? Well, this, her message was, this is a real job. This is the real job that this country needs to do to rebuild itself and sustain itself. That's a pretty powerful message.
And I'm curious, does your organization deal with anything in terms of managing, in tough economic times? And is that a theme that's going to come up in your talk tomorrow or in other presentations or et cetera that you
inevitably? And Peter wrote a lot about managing in what he would call turbulent times. Absolutely. I mean, these are organizations that are increasingly strapped for resources, as are all organizations across all sectors. And so it's tough. And I think what it calls for is leaders and managers to be increasingly creative, to look for ways to partner, to look for ways to that are beyond money to advance their mission and to meet their mission. And there's some interesting, things that are clearly being done in that regard. This pro bono service movement that I've mentioned, which is enormous. PricewaterhouseCoopers talked about it from the podium yesterday. Deloitte is doing great work in this area, where they have partners going out, and Deloitte does work with us. They do strategic consulting on a pro bono basis for the Drucker Society Network.
Wow.
So they're designing, and they've given us, lots and lots of hours worth, lots and lots of real money if we had to go out and hire somebody to do this, and we would have to do this work. They're helping us design assessment tools, performance metrics for the Drucker Society Network. And it's an enormous contribution that they can make without having to put dollars on the table, but they're giving their employees time to us, which is incredibly valuable. And it comes when maybe their employees have a little more time to give because they're not quite as busy.
Right.
So it's a good match. It's a way to keep their skills sharp, and it's a way to help us advance our mission.
Wow. And has there been anything else that you've picked up just from any sessions that you've attended that you would apply to your the work that you do at the Institute?
The other thing that's got me thinking about is how we reach even more folks than we have with our Drucker Society Network. I was just at a very interesting session that talked about engaging immigrant communities, for example, here in the U.S. And getting them engaged in volunteering and in a service ethic. We have to remember that obviously there are volunteer organizations and tremendous ones all over the world, but this whole spirit of volunteering and community and civic engagement, the way we think of it in a lot of ways, really is an American phenomenon. It's something de Tocqueville wrote about, right?
Yes.
Centuries ago, and it's something that is uniquely American in some ways, and we've got to figure out, I think, how to engage immigrants who come here in that process as well.
And applying that to your specific realm of work, is there anything specifically that you've thought of differently along those lines?
No, again, just ways that we can perhaps, get people. It's made me think about who our non-customers are. That's what Peter would have called them. Who are we not reaching with our Drucker Society outreach efforts? And I don't know the answers, but it's got my wheels turning in that regard.
Yeah. And there's been also some talk here about sort of the collaboration of corporate and nonprofit efforts. And, you deal with a lot of corporations as well as maybe some nonprofits.
Yes, we deal across sectors.
You do with cross sectors. How do you think that that both can continue to work together and more closely in these economic times, and also at a time when, service is taking center stage?
Sure. I think on the nonprofits part, it's incumbent on them to kind of make sure that they're ready to receive pro bono help. There's been some really good research done by the Taproot Foundation, which suggests that a lot of nonprofits don't really know what they even need or how they would utilize all the pro bono resources that are out there. And so there's work to be done on the nonprofit side for sure. And on the corporate side, I think more and more companies will realize and are going to have to realize that they need to be giving in this way. And they need to be giving in part because the millennials, their new employees, are demanding it. They want to work for companies that do more than just talk about social responsibility or have some platitudes and a code of conduct. They want to work for corporations that are actually engaged in such work. And if they don't find that, they're going to go to firms that do provide that, again, that way for them to meet this part of the passion that's in them.
Right, not to mention that it's so cool that
yes,
now
exactly.
that it's so cool, they want to take part.
Yeah, it's a real cultural shift. I mean, when I was in college, I think I graduated in '87, and you know, the ethic then was it was the whole Wall Street thing. It was greed is good. You know, it was Gordon Gekko was the ethic, and you know, I think we've in some ways, and it's incredibly healthy. We've gone. There's a cultural shift now from the, you know, greed is good to the common good, and I think it's very profound. And I think it's real.
Very well said. And so with your institute, what do you, not your institute, but the institute, what's the vision, you know, in the coming years for how you'll continue to be involved in supporting these organizations?
Right. Well, we do, again, I'm speaking tomorrow, we do a bit of training for nonprofit leaders to try and steep them in Peter's work and his principles on effectiveness and innovation and so forth, and we'll continue to do that work. You know, we also have some material that's available through the Institute and just on Amazon. You can find, you know, Peter's resources. Two that I would mention. One is there is a book that actually we don't produce. It's produced by the Leader to Leader Institute in New York. It's called The 5 Most Important Questions Your Organization Will Ever Ask, and that is available on Amazon by Peter Drucker, and I would highly recommend it. It's a great tool to have. Peter also wrote a book called Managing the Nonprofit Organization. It's a little green book from HarperCollins, and it's also incredibly valuable. There's great material in there. And we, through the Drucker Institute website, we have an audio series of Peter talking. It's 25 hours of audio, and it's a downloadable format, all for $25. I mean, we priced it very low with the idea that it would be accessible for nonprofit leaders, and it's Peter talking about effectiveness in the social sector and interviewing nonprofit leaders about their experience. So.
Wonderful. How did you, if I could ask, get involved with the Drucker Institute?
I'm like Peter. Peter, you know, if you asked him what he did, he would always say, "I'm a writer," and I'm a writer. I started as a journalist. I was a journalist for 20 years at the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times for the last 5 years, and then I got a headhunter call out of the blue to see if I'd be interested in running this organization, and I knew enough of Peter's work to be very intrigued, and quickly found in digging around at it that it really hit the areas I was interested in, namely the intersection of society and business, or society and kind of management, and something I had focused on for not as long as Peter, but for a long time. And I also found that his values were very much aligned with mine, so it was a good fit.
And if I can ask you, since we seem to have a lot of time here, if I could ask you, just from a journalist perspective, you know, what's your take on the role that the media will need to play in assisting this new movement?
It's incredibly exciting, and I mean, you know, the fact that you can set up a TV studio right here with a computer and a camera is pretty mind blowing. And it's great. I mean, there is so much. Obviously, that can be done in terms of social media and social networking, and there's all these things that I only know a little bit about from what I read and people I talk to, but the kind of work that David Paine is doing at gooddeed.org, and the initiative that's being launched at the federal level. I can't remember what it was called. That was mentioned last night.
Serve.org.
Serve.org.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many of these sites that seem to be coming up that are trying to match opportunity with people's passions, and I think that's terrific. Now, the only thing I would wonder about on some level, and I assume this will sort itself out, I'd be curious what you think, is whether there's so much of it that it's almost bewildering at some point, and that there may be a fair amount of redundancy that'll shake itself out, I assume.